What's up? Welcome back to Fluent Friends. This is your hosts, Nick and Benai. Today we are continuing on the topic of movies. We will be discussing the elements of movie production, specifically what it takes to make a low-budget or high-budget film. Be prepared for movie recommendations and listening practice for numbers. At the end, we'll recap the vocabulary.
Perfect. So let's start with those.
I am perfect.
Let's focus on the episode.
Okay, that's right.
So let's start with the high-budget movies. When I say high-budget movies, what are some of the movies that kind of go through your head?
When I think about high-budget movies, one that comes to mind right away is Avatar, even though I didn't really like that movie. But Avatar, the second one, was just released, and the first one was, I think, a little over a decade ago. Those ones cost quite a bit. And then the second one is a series, Fast and Furious, which I think there's been 9.
In fact, there's been 10, and I don't know if there will be more. At this point, I'm not surprised anymore.
Yeah, they're going to be graying. Luckily, Vin Diesel already doesn't have hair, so he could make it. As he gets older, it doesn't really seem to matter.
So when I think about high-budget movies and know the millions of dollars that go into a single episode like Game of Thrones or one single movie in Fast and Furious, I ask myself, like, where does the money go?
Yeah, and I think that for some cases, Fast and Furious is a good example of probably there's a lot of money going to the actors and actresses in there. I think that somebody like Vin Diesel is making a pretty penny off of the 8th and 9th movie, probably making a lot more than he made on number 1 and number 2. So that's one aspect. The other one would be CGI, wouldn't you agree?
Computer-generated imagery, definitely. So the first example was Avatar, right? Actually, when Avatar came out more than 10 years ago, it was one of the first and only movies that was made in 3D. So that's what made them very expensive, and that's what took them such a long time to produce as well.
Yeah, and in that case, it's also the creation of an entirely new fantasy world, and doing so with computer images. Whereas Benai mentioned earlier Game of Thrones, and that's a little bit different, but definitely equally as expensive, finding locations, right? So with Game of Thrones, I think, where were they filming it?
I believe parts of it were filmed in Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, places like that. So that also makes you think about Lord of the Rings, where they get those natural beauty.
Yeah, and that's a great example of, well, why does it cost so much? Think about going to and from these places, taking an airplane. When you purchase one individual ticket to fly to Europe or to go to New Zealand, that costs you quite a bit of money. Now think about transporting not only the actors and actresses, but all the people who are involved in filming, all that equipment that has to go with them as well, and that tends to add up. So that's why, as Benai mentioned, Game of Thrones, a single episode can cost as much as a low-budget film, a few $1 million.
And that's also why when a movie or series has to be filmed in different locations, sometimes for budgetary reasons, they have to hire local crews.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll talk a little bit about some examples in which they use local crews and why that might be beneficial for the people making a movie. But I think I kind of wanted to touch base also. We had mentioned CGI and Avatar, Fast and the Furious, but Fast and the Furious is a great example of there's explosions like there are in Avatar, but those are probably done by pyrotechnics. So that's actual real explosions, probably using real dynamite or explosive material, and then also the use of fire, etc., right, for those exciting car chases. Right? Those are actually done by probably stunt doubles. Now, some famous actors do their own stunts, but a lot of them don't.
I believe so, and that makes them very pricey as well. So, question, pyrotechnics, does it have to be explosions or do fireworks and all that count as well? Do you know?
Yeah, definitely fireworks, fire, all of that fall under the same category as pyrotechnics. That's explosions, that's fireworks, that's actual fires, right? A burning building. All of that has to be controlled. They have to have an expert. There's somebody who they have studied how to safely make a car explode.
It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, and it's probably a pretty fun job when you think about it, right?
It sounds very dangerous. I don't think it's fun, but, obviously they're experts.
A great movie that you can see it going wrong is Tropic Thunder, the comedy.
Oh, yeah.
So in Tropic Thunder, it's a movie about people making a movie, and it's a war movie, so there's a lot of pyrotechnics involved. The guns, explosions. In one scene, they accidentally push the button and cause all of the pyrotechnics to shoot off at the same time, wasting millions upon millions of dollars.
I forgot about that. That is a funny scene. I mean, this whole movie is a comedy in general, but that is a funny scene. Yeah. So that goes to show you the amount of expertise and real techniques that needs to go into it.
Yeah, and so in other cases too, in terms of big budget films that they're not using CGI, I think engineering also can play a role. And so one really good example is Master and Commander.
2003年的怒海争锋.
That one, I've seen it many times, love it, especially because it's a work of history. It's an interesting one, not only for the engineering, which I think, Benai will kind of let you in on that, but also another one where you don't think about it. It's a movie that hired an actual historian, right? So some movies, if they're historical dramas or even comedies, they might hire a real historian to consult what would be historically accurate and inaccurate. But I think the engineering aspect of it is really cool, Benai, don't you think, of that movie?
Definitely. So as the name suggests, 怒海争锋. So it's actually about, in this movie, you need a boat, you need the ocean. They didn't actually film the boat scene or the ship scene in the ocean. They built and engineered a pool, right?
Yeah, they built a pool and then they created this mechanical device that was under the water that the ship was on, and it mimicked the real motions that a ship in the age of sail, so it's before there's engines or motors, how it would move in various conditions in the ocean. And that's how they filmed all of their scenes. I definitely would recommend that film. And I think once you know that and you realize that some of it's CGI, the weather, some of it they just waited for bad weather because they built this outside, I think you'll appreciate the movie even more. Yeah, so we mentioned earlier that some big budget films, they may not have grand explosions or even car chases, but they do have big names, and that's another reason why the budget might be particularly high. But that doesn't always have to be the case. In terms of low budget films, you might think that they're using no-name actors or poor special effects. They might have a terribly written script and not be particularly interesting, but there are a lot of great examples where a low-budget film can be very entertaining, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Good storytelling, interesting dialogues. We have a few good examples later on.
Yeah, and the notion, just to start off with, when I did mention those famous actors, actresses, there are examples where the movie is actually low budget and the actor or actress works with that director because they just love the movies that they make. And I think one example is Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel.
Definitely. In fact, so this movie came out in 2014. The budget was $25 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but in Hollywood, it's actually pretty low. And for box office, they actually made $173 million.
And that movie is a great example of a director, Wes Anderson, and how he produces a film and what's important to him. And I think that the way in which it was shot, how they created the scenery was really quite genius, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. So to give you some examples, obviously the Grand Budapest Hotel, you need a hotel. So instead of looking for a real vintage hotel, they transformed an old abandoned shopping mall into a hotel. And that creative director actually went on to win an Oscar. The other things that they use to cut down budget is also using miniatures. They also use matte paintings, which are essentially just painted backgrounds from different artists. So that's also a way, instead of traveling to different locations, they use pictures in the background.
And I think the use of miniatures is really interesting because that's how a lot of old movies were able to create everything from battle scenes to cityscapes. When you look back at, for example, the old Godzilla films and you see Godzilla destroying a city, it's just a man in a costume trampling over a miniature city. So it's cool to see a new film using those old techniques and winning praise for it, especially in an age where a lot of movies, they would probably just create a hotel out of CGI, or maybe they just go to New York City and film some old hotel in downtown Manhattan. Some low-budget films also due to the fact that they have a low budget, they are constrained on time. And so they have to film within a very, very tight schedule because all of that, the staff to make a film, the equipment to make it as well, it all costs a certain amount of money for each day, down to the hour, probably down to the minute that they're using it. So a lot of low budget films, they're filmed in a very short period of time. I don't know, can you think of anyone in particular that was filmed over a short period of time?
Oh yeah, definitely. So one of my personal favorite is called The Fair, 2019年的异度回圈. And this is actually a very small indie director. She made this entire movie, in 6 days. I have a perfect quote for you. She said, "We only had 6 days to shoot the entire movie, which meant we couldn't do more than a couple of takes per setup."
Yeah, and I think a lot of variables have to come together in order for a movie like that to be successful. You don't have a lot of time for the cast to develop chemistry, and you also have to be sure of your decisions and have decisiveness as a director, right? They couldn't do a lot of takes, so they had to make sure that they got it right, and they got it right pretty quickly. And I think it was a really entertaining movie as well. And that one's interesting too because if I remember correctly, there aren't very many cast members in it.
I gotta double check, but there are only 2 main characters in the entire movie. There may be 1 or 2 side small supporting actors, but 2 people.
Yeah, for the most film, you're just seeing the 2 people interact with each other in a car.
Yeah. As an independent director, she also has to wear many hats during the production of the movie. Like you said, to make that executive decision really, really fast so that they can wrap up every day. Because like you said, in terms of budget, all the equipment that they used to film a movie had to be rented. The directors and the actors, they don't own those equipment. They cost a pretty penny. They cost a lot of money. So they rented down to the hour. So all they had was 6 days, and that's what they did.
Yeah, it's great to point out that in indie films or even in low-budget films, the director sometimes wears many different hats. And one good example is Sofia Coppola and her film Lost in Translation.
2003年的爱情不用翻译.
That's a great example of a movie that, similar to The Fair, it was shot over the course of a very short period of time, quick setup, and it really depended on the actors getting it right with only a few takes. And she was lucky enough to land Bill Murray, who's a very famous comedic actor, although this is somewhat of a dark comedy, I think, Lost in Translation, in the film, because not only was he able to do this, but it also depended a lot on improv.
Which is short for to improvise or improvisation.
Yeah, so there were a few scenes in the film where the script wasn't exactly written out. She trusted Bill Murray as an actor to come up with the lines himself, and he successfully did so. And it was a huge hit. This movie only cost $4 million, and $1 million of that went to Bill Murray himself. And I think it made around $118 million. So it's an example of how a low-budget film can sometimes attract a big name and also can score really big in the box office.
To me, low-budget movies have a certain kind of allure to them because nowadays we see directors and movies costing millions and millions of dollars. So it does intrigue me a little bit more to see what directors can come up with limited time and budget. So we get a few recommendations for you guys.
Yeah, in terms of low-budget films, I would definitely recommend Lost in Translation, the one that we just discussed there with Bill Murray. I think it's great. And I think also for a bilingual audience, it's a movie that touches on that subject in a really funny way.
I also want to say its Chinese translation is kind of horrible because it says 爱情不用翻译, which roughly translates to English like, love doesn't need translation. It doesn't need to be translated. But this movie is not just about love. To me, it's that cross-cultural communication and cultural shock. So I think a lot of people can relate to that. 2016年的电影无声夜 called Hush. This movie was made with only $1 million about a deaf and mute writer. It's more of a thriller and the story happens over the course of one night. I'm a sucker for this kind of story. So I believe it's very exciting. It's very fast. So if you're into thriller, I definitely recommend it.
All right, so let's go over some vocabulary. Pretty penny, but I wanted me to say that because it's kind of a tongue twister, right?
Pretty penny.
There you go.
It's all right.
So you can use this. I'll use it in a sentence. I spent a pretty penny on my new car.
That movie cost a pretty penny.
Right. So pretty penny, we use it mostly to describe a significant amount of money. Right? It's not a little bit of money. If I said I spent a pretty penny on the car, it's not going to be a rust bucket.
Cityscape.
Cityscape, think about an urban type of environment or setting. One example, we didn't discuss the film in this podcast, but I think Batman is kind of a good one. For those new Batman movies, there's always set in the fictional city of Gotham. And for those films, they actually used different shots of New York, Chicago, and London to create that fictional environment. So, cityscape.
It's like the fingerprint of a city.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
To have chemistry. What's the meaning to have chemistry?
Well, think back to chemistry class. I know none of you fell asleep during that class like I did. No, I mean, I didn't do that. But chemistry, we're talking about two people that seemingly have a bond with each other. And that can be played out through dialogue or the way they look into each other's eyes.
People who work very smoothly, seamlessly together.
And I think another good example, we brought up the Grand Budapest Hotel and Wes Anderson, the director. If you are a fan of him, you'll notice that he tends to get a lot of big names. We already mentioned Bill Murray, but there's some other big names too that he frequently gets in his films, Ben Stiller, and he still manages to get them and not pay them particularly much, and that's because he has good chemistry with these actors and actresses. They want to work with him. So that's something important too. Actors and actresses can have chemistry within a film, playing their role, but it's important to also have chemistry with the director themselves and even the crew.
Next up, what's the meaning of wearing many hats?
It means that you have a lot of different jobs.
To have multiple responsibilities, right?
Yep.
How about box office?
Box office refers to what the movie makes, the dollar amount upon its theatrical release, although now we also talk about streaming views as well, because that's become important.
Last but not least, what is improv?
Yeah, improv is you're making it up as you go.
To improvise, to think of something off the top of your head in the moment.
And you'd be surprised. Happens a lot in movies.
Sometimes we have to improv a little bit in our podcast too.
Not scripted, off the cuff. Oh, that's a vocabulary for another time.
Everything will be listed in show notes. So don't forget to subscribe and to check out our newsletter.
We'll see you next time.